Hello, and welcome to a summary of Genesis 1 through 11 by Brian Lee. This is an assignment for the residency at the Well, spring 2024. All right, well, let's get started. So to begin, let's take a look real quick at kind of a breakdown of Genesis in the Bible. And here we can see the basic storyline, chapters 1 through 50 of Genesis. And we'll be looking at 1 through 11. So in chapter 1, we start with God. And this is about creation. Then from there, chapter 2, we take a look at man as described in the Bible, in Genesis. Then sin, and how sin entered the world, and what we call the fall. Redemption comes next, and this was basically God's gift to us, to man, to Adam and Eve, after sinning, and then from there we go to civilization and the growth of civilization, and then things went really bad because of sin, and now we have judgment. Finally, we end with nations, races, and pagan religions. So basically, we're going to start pure here, and we're going to start pure here in chapter 2. Sin's going to enter in chapter 3, and then it all goes down after that. So, all right, here we go. All right, Genesis 1. So God created the heaven and the earth. The world before God's creation was without form and void, with darkness over the deep. God's Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. So those are key points for Genesis 1. One thing I found interesting about this quote, without form and void, with darkness over the deep. Clearly, the earth was not what we know it to be today. I don't know what it was, but it was without form and void. So maybe it was more a scattering of matter. Who knows? But I think it's important to open up our mind here and recognize that the earth was truly created from something very different than what we know today. So on day 1 of creation, God created light by speaking into existence. Light was separated from darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night. Now, as we move in, I believe it's about day 3 or 4, we are going to end up with the creation of the universe and perhaps the sun. So I think what God is calling light here may be a different light than what we know from the sun. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. But he does create the difference between night and day, and we end up with evening and morning. In day 2, God created an expanse to separate the waters, which would be atmosphere. So there was not a clear definition between the earth and the area surrounding the earth. There was perhaps a liquid form. I don't know, but he separated it and caused atmosphere to form, air, and he called the expanse heaven. So on day 3, God created dry land and called it earth. Dry land separated the waters. God called waters that gathered around the land seas. God created all kinds of vegetation. Plants, trees, fruits, photosyntheses would have had a place now, but and we do have light, so photosynthesis could work. We have seeds, so we're thinking, God is thinking about the future here in growth. But weeds, were there weeds? Well, at this point in time, the earth was perfect. And I would suggest that there were not weeds. That was not a concern at this point. What existed with respect to vegetation was the purest form of vegetation. The trees that were there were beautiful. The fruits were fruitful and potentially nutritious. And weeds being much like sin, if you think about it, would not have a purpose for the world at that point in time. So here God created the sun, moon, planets, and stars and placed them in the heavens. So I would suggest that perhaps that whatever that form of light was that created day and night in the very beginning has now been replaced with the sun, and the creation of our universe. What we know now is there are many universes, and so I guess my question would be, when God created our universe, was there already universes, perhaps millions or billions or thousands, who knows, in addition to our universe? And this allowed, with the rotation of the planets around the sun, this allowed the establishment of days, seasons, and years. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. And so was light created on day one? The cyclical light established on day 4? My answer would be probably not. I think on day 4 we had a new form of light that was perhaps sustainable, that's something perhaps God didn't have to maintain. Day 5, God created swarms of sea life and winged birds to fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. God created great sea creatures. And he said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas and let the birds multiply on the earth. So God's intent from the very beginning was to see a multiplication, a growth of birds and sea life, and as we will see, anything that had a living aspect to it. He is giving the command to multiply and be fruitful. Day 6, God creates living creatures for dry land, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth. And then he says, let us make man in our image. Notice he says our. This is the first reference to the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Created in God's image, he creates a male and female. Man shall have dominion over the sea, heavens, livestock, creeping things, over the whole earth. So he just put man in charge. Blesses man, be fruitful and multiply. There it is again. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So on day 7, God rested, and now we've moved into Genesis 2. God made the 7th day holy after blessing it. The creation of man is next, and here we provide more detail. Now, if we go back, we saw that on day 6, God created man, but here we're seeing some more detail. How men and women were created. Man was created from the dust of the ground. God gave him a soul by breathing life into his nostrils. This is interesting because here he didn't just speak to create. Here he breathed into man in order to create. So clearly there's a very personal connection to between man and God, and perhaps this is why that, and perhaps the reason why is because we, men and women, were made in His after it. We were made like Him. Okay, here we go. The Garden of Eden. So God put the man in garden that He had planted in the east of Eden. All kinds of trees and plants grew in the garden. Presumably, weeds did not grow in the garden yet. So God placed two special trees in the middle of the garden: the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. 4 rivers flowed out of Eden, which watered the garden: the Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and Euphrates. God told Adam he could eat from every tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God decided that man needed a companion. So the man named all the animals brought to him. None of the animals were suitable as a companion. God caused the man to fall asleep. God took one of man's ribs and formed a woman while the man slept. The woman was a perfect companion for the man. God designed men and women to be joined as one flesh, what we know as marriage. As such, they could leave their parents as one. The man and woman were naked in the garden, but were not ashamed. They weren't ashamed because there was no sin. They didn't know what it meant to be ashamed. And now in Genesis 3, we find the fall. A serpent asked the woman about God's rules regarding which trees they could eat from. The serpent was Satan. Satan was using the form of a serpent, and in order to communicate with Eve. The man and woman could eat from every tree except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they ate of the tree, they would die. That is what Adam had told to Eve. The serpent told the woman, Eve, she was mistaken. If she ate fruit from the tree, they would be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, apparently this was too much temptation to resist. So the woman ate the fruit and gave some to her husband, who ate it. Their eyes were immediately open. They realized they were naked and then tried to make clothing out of fig leaves. So Eve ate first, then Adam. Obviously, they had had a conversation, right? And if when we read the text, we see a small snippet of that conversation. Adam made the same mistake, and now they immediately saw a need to cover their privates. Sin had officially entered the world. So next, God confronts this disobedience. The man and woman hide in the garden from God. God finds the man and woman and asks, have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? Now, important point here, God knows all, and he certainly knew that Adam and Eve had sinned. But he's asking the question, and you see this consistently in the Old Testament. He's asking the question of people that he finds cause and a likely outcome. Well, how do I want to say this? When he finds an interest in training people, in teaching, he will ask a question of them in the Old Testament. God asks questions because he is teaching Adam and Eve. Man blames woman for giving the fruit. Now, this is interesting. So the man immediately blames the woman for giving the fruit. And he also implies that God was at fault when he said, the woman you gave to be with me. So, God, had you not given me that woman, I wouldn't be in this fix. Now, Eve was a little more direct. Um, she blamed the serpent for deceiving her. Now, she didn't take outright responsibility. Somebody had deceived her, the serpent had deceived her. Um, and I guess a side note here is that this direction from God, not to eat from the tree, um, that was third hand information in her world. She had received information, she had received that direction from Adam. What we don't know is how well Adam explained the direction he had gotten firsthand from God. Just a interesting little side note there. So God cursed the serpent, on your belly you shall go. He doesn't ask questions of the serpent because he knows he is talking to Satan. Now, this is a point, or the fact that he knows he's talking to Satan is perhaps something people regularly recognize. But the part that they may not recognize is when he says, on your belly you shall go. This implies that the serpent was not on his belly. So who knows what form this serpent had? Perhaps the serpent was standing upright. Maybe it had 4 legs. Maybe it had 6. Maybe it only had 2. Who knows? But on this day, the serpent would spend the rest of eternity on his belly. God puts enmity, hostility between woman and the serpent, and between Satan and the offspring of man and woman. So now there's going to be a permanent wedge between woman and snakes, and the serpent, and between the offspring of man and woman. So now offspring, notice it doesn't indicate man or woman, or a boy or a girl as offspring. So this would imply that from this day forward, once Adam and Eve have their first child, that their offspring, whether boy or girl, are going to have hostility towards snakes. And I would say that probably can be seen today by pretty much universally. It takes somebody who has training, who is determined to overcome that fear of a snake, to actually want to handle one. This next statement is interesting. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, it's important here to recognize that God is talking to Satan here. And what he's saying is mankind will maintain dominance over the serpent through Jesus Christ. That's the big picture. And notice, bruising your head is far more severe than bruising your heel. Bruising your head has the potential to kill somebody. Bruising your heel does not. So, in a big picture sense, that is, he's saying that ultimately I will prevail through Jesus Christ. Woman would suffer pain in childbearing, and her husband would rule over her. This would drive women to challenge man's authority. In other words, the woman, having suffered a lot of pain during childbirth, is going to consider that when evaluating her role in that relationship. If she had to endure that kind of pain, then she surely is worthy of the respect that would come with that. The ground was now cursed because of sin. Man would now labor with difficulty in the growth of food. So now weeds are going to be a problem. Maybe we have extreme weather, poor soil conditions, degeneration of vegetation. So when the Garden of Eden began, when it was first created, there was perfection. Now there would not be perfection. Now man, Adam, would have to till the soil in order to make it in order to facilitate the growth of vegetation. Perhaps where there was water, there isn't water now. We would have to get water to an area in order for vegetation to grow. So this makes work, hard work for mankind. And then ultimately, mankind would return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So the implication here is that when Adam and Eve were created, before this fall, before this fatal sin, they were immortal, and they would not have died, nor would they have aged. But man was no longer immortal like God. Adam and Eve would die. So next, the man and woman are removed from the garden. Man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all living. God made the man and Eve clothing from animal skins. One commentator pointed out that there's nothing comfortable about fig leaves, which is what Adam and Eve tried to use in the beginning. So God showed grace here in demonstrating how animal skins could be used to cover them. Adam and Eve were removed from the Garden of Eden, so they would no longer have access to the tree of life. And at the entrance to the Garden of Eden, God placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Now, while we're here, let's stop for just a second and see where we're at. So we've covered chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. Now, redemption starts at chapter 3, verse 15. So if we go back to you can see that 15 starts here in the curse of sin. So redemption is in the punishment. The punishment to both the serpent and to Adam and Eve. All right, so now we get into Genesis 4. Now in Genesis 4, we find the story of Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel were the sons of Adam and Eve. Abel was a sheep herder and Cain was a farmer. They prepared a sacrificial offering to the Lord. Cain sacrificed vegetable produce. Abel offered the firstborn sheep of his flock. God found Abel's offering much more pleasing than Cain's. Well, if we look at that, Abel offered the firstborn sheep of his flock. This was one of the most important pieces of his wealth. And so consequently, he was demonstrating faith and love towards God at a much higher level than Cain, who used his vegetable produce. The vegetable produce was much easier to replace than the firstborn sheep of a flock. So God was pleased with Abel's offering, but was disappointed by Cain's. Cain was consumed by anger, and he killed Abel. This was the first murder in the Bible. And I should note that this would not have happened had the fall not occurred. And evidence of sin as it is escalating, as it from generation to generation becomes more and more complex and deeper into the culture and the belief system of the people on the earth. So God curses Cain for murdering his brother. God asked Cain where his brother had gone. Here he's asking the question again. He's teaching as if he didn't know, but he knew. Cain replies, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Now, this was an opportunity for Cain to come clean. And had he came clean with God, this is the teaching part, his consequence could have been far less severe, I can only imagine. But instead, he denied it and he played dumb. So God places a curse on Cain as punishment because he knew what Cain had done. Since Cain had spilled his brother's blood on earth, he would no longer be able to grow things. Cain was to wander as a fugitive on the earth. Now, this was an order from God. God could have given him, could have put the conditions in place where he had no choice but to wander as a fugitive on earth. And had he done so, he may have been offered redemption from God at some point, forgiveness, because it would have been a sign that he had learned his lesson. But no, he actually went a different direction. So Cain protested his punishment. Men would kill him when they found out who he was. So he was concerned about his safety. God had told him he was going to be a fugitive. God didn't tell him that he would be murdered someday. He was going to be protected by God. So then the Lord said to him, if anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. So Cain was protected from murder. But you'll notice Cain settled in the land of Nod, and he had a son named Enoch. So this is definitely not a person who is wandering the earth and as a fugitive, right? He has settled down, and he has a son. His great-grandson, Lamech, marries two wives. So again, and this is more sin. So now we have one man married to two wives. Lamech claims to have killed another man for striking him. So clearly he has an evil tone to him. Lamech had three sons. Jabal worked with livestock. Jabal played the lyre and pipe, and Tubal-Cain was a forger of bronze and iron. I think I've got a little bit of a typo there. I only have two sons. Yep, I got a problem there in that. Sorry about that. I have to go look those three up. But the point of this particular highlight is that there's industry here. We've got a musician, a forger, and a rancher. So industry has evolved. We have society. We have a society that's evolving. Adam and Eve had another son named Seth. Perhaps in response to growing consequence of sin, people began to call the name of the Lord. So here we are in Genesis 4, and we're seeing a little bit of a reversal. Maybe people are seeing this consequence and seeing how sin can really lead them down the wrong place. While we're here, let's stop and review where we're at in our timeline. So we're here in civilization still, 4 and 5. All right, so here's the genealogy of Adam and Eve through Seth. Adam lived 130 years. Adam lived to 930 years. Seth, 912 years. Enosh, 905 years. Kenan, 910. Mahalalel, 895. Jared, 962 years. Enoch, 365 years. However, he didn't die. Enoch we are told that the Lord took him. This is one of only a couple of occasions in the Bible where somebody was taken away to heaven. Methuselah, 969. Lamech, 777 years. Noah, 500 years. Now, sorry, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth at 500 years. He lived longer than that. Got another little mistake there. So, there is a trend here that is subtle and something that people, it hasn't been my experience, people pick up on very often. It's the trend of declining age. 930, 912. Now, it's not like every one of these people dies sooner than the next. But generally speaking, we start at 930 and we end at 777 years. This is sin taking hold. Now, this is in the form of crime, like murder, also disease, right? So disease is part of the fall. Remember that we started as people who had immortality, right? That's who Adam and Eve were. They were immortal, and everything was perfect. And once the fall occurred, the process of disease, just like the weeds in the garden, began. We're going to see more evidence of this as we go along. All right, now we're in Genesis 6. And if we go back to our timeline, Genesis 6 through 9 is a period of judgment. So let's take a look at that. So this particular chapter is tough. The sons of God found the daughters of men very attractive, taking them as wives in any number. So the question here is, who is the sons of God found? And the daughters of men is somewhat self-explanatory. Clearly, they were daughters of men. But the sons of God, that's alarming. God indicates that judgment is coming when he said, his day shall be 120 years, his being men. The flood was coming. Got a typo there, C-O-M-I-N-G. Now, the implication here is that God is seeing something that is not good. And it has to do with the timeline, with the bloodline. So you have sons of God in this text, and that implies something other than man. And then in this next verse, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters. Came into the daughters means they had sex of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of renown. So the big question is, who were the Nephilim? Now, there are three different theories there. So one would be that Nephilim were a ungodly line from Cain. So the offspring from the godly line of Seth was interacting or breeding with the ungodly line of Cain. So this would interfere and spoil the bloodline leading to Jesus Christ. Cain was ungodly, Seth was godly. So that's one theory. Another theory is that the sons of God were royalty, or powerful individuals marrying commoners. Now, these would have been maybe greedy people, maybe from the line of Cain again, ungodly, and could have spoiled the bloodline of Jesus Christ. And then there's a third, and that's that angels had intercourse with the daughters of men. Now, it's interesting they use sons of God. I'm not sure that royalty or powerful individuals would qualify as sons of God. And sons of God would not clearly be associated with the bloodline of Cain. So maybe something did happen here. Who knows? Whatever it was, God was not pleased with the union of the godly line of Seth with the ungodly line of Cain, and he needed to stop it. So God saw the spread of wickedness in the hearts of men. And the wickedness of man was great, and every intention of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. The world was filled with violence and corruption. So enter Noah. Noah found favor in the eyes of God because he was righteous. God told Noah of his intent to destroy mankind with a flood. He instructed him to construct an ark. The ark would preserve Noah and his family during the flood. The ark would preserve Noah and his family. Just said that. Made from gopher wood and covered with pitch. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits tall. A cubit's about 18 inches. What we're talking about here is about 3 football fields. The ark would save Noah, his family, and the animal kingdom. Noah stocked the ark with food and water for his family and the animals on board. Noah did exactly as the Lord commanded. Now, it took 120 years to do this for Noah, right? Because that was the timeline that God gave in the previous, when we started this chapter. So in Genesis 7, Noah prepares for the flood. God promises to keep Noah and his family alive in the ark during the worldwide flood. God instructed Noah to take 7 pairs of all clean animals into the ark, along with 1 pair of all unclean animals. I'm unclear what the difference is between a clean and an unclean animal is. Need to research that further. The animals come to the ark on their own volition. So God drove the animals to the ark. God advises Noah the flood would begin in 7 days with continuous rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, interesting thing to consider here. The animals came to the ark on their own volition. Sometimes I think we think about the idea of those animals, okay, the ark is done. God sends the natural, the desire on part of the animal to migrate, right? But the reality is that there were animals that were, a long ways away. And so remember that God had 120 years to plan this. So it could be that the animals were driven over time to migrate towards the ark. And so there may have been a sense of a migration amongst many different animals heading in the same direction over, say, 100 years. Who knows? So ultimately, God advises Noah the flood would begin in 7 days with continuous rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Noah was 600 years old when the earth was flooded. Noah's wife, his sons, and his sons' wives accompanying him on the ark, 8 in total. God shut and sealed the door before the flood started. Now, this is interesting. This tells us that if God shut the door, then God was with Noah on the ark. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Now, in the previous slide, it says, whoops, went the wrong way. In the previous slide, it says, God advises Noah the flood would begin in 7 days with continuous rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Now, I think we oftentimes think of the flood as associated with continuous rain, right? Only a rain event. Now, in reality, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. So there were wells all over the countryside, right? And so, and there were natural wells, there were man-made wells, and so water was driven from deep inside the earth, and the windows of the heavens were open, so it began to rain, and rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So we had water coming from below and from above. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm of the earth, and all mankind. The flood persisted for 150 days. So for 40 days, we had rain, but the flood continues for 150 days. I can only imagine there may have been water coming in from below for an even longer period of time, coming up through the fountains of the great deep in order to sustain that water level for 150 days. At the end of 150 days, we start to see a little bit of water subsiding. God caused a great wind and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep closed. There it is. So while it stopped raining at 40 days, the fountains of the deep had been open up to 150 days. In the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. In the 10th month, the tops of the mountains could be seen. Now, at this point, Noah and his family have been on that ark for almost a year. That must have been rough. So Noah sends out a raven and a dove. He released a raven for the window of the ark, which went to and fro from the flood waters until the flood waters dried up. Now, a raven would have fed on carcasses and would have had great range. So it's a larger bird and not very picky as to what it's willing to eat, right? So now, unfortunately, that means there's going to be animal carcasses and human carcasses all over the world. So it makes sense that the raven found it convenient to go to and from. He had a home base, and off he would go to eat and then come back. Noah released a dove, which returned to the ark when it could not find a place to land. So the dove is going to need a little more comfort before it's going to find a place to stay. After 7 days, Noah released the dove again and returned with a fresh olive leaf. So clearly the dove had found vegetation somewhere. After 7 more days, he released the dove again, but it did not return. We were getting close. Noah and his family leave the ark. Noah inspected the land around the ark and found it to be dry. After more than a year, Noah, his family, and all the animals leave the ark. Noah built an altar to God and sacrificed some of the clean animals. God promised he would never again strike down every living creature as he had done with the flood waters. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. God gives Noah further instruction. He tells Noah, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Heard that before, haven't we? The Nephilim, their descendants, and mankind worldwide had been destroyed. And while God had deemed Noah as righteous, Noah's family was not pure like Adam and Eve before the fall. So the consequences of the fall would continue. So clearly God knew that sin would continue to devour people and would continue to grow. He had cut the Nephilim off at the pass, and now we had once again a protected bloodline for the birth of Jesus Christ. But And clearly Jesus was still needed because the problem of sin had not been resolved. Jesus was going to be the answer to this question of how to ultimately spend eternity with God, with Jesus, um, in a world full of sin that surrounds us every day. So the consequences of the fall would continue because Noah's family was not pure like Adam and Eve. He instructs Noah that all animals and plants can be used for food, but do not eat meat that contain blood. Blood is sacred because it gave life to animals and humans. Jesus Christ would also shed his blood for mankind. Now, so number one, when we eat meat, we eat blood. I'm sorry. When we eat meat and we cook it, if there are remnants of blood, the blood has been cooked away. And it should be noted that raw meat, let's say rare meat, what we see, that red meat or that red coloring to the meat is not actually blood. So, so this idea of not eating blood is still common today. Murder shall be penalized by death. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. So he lays out murder as something that should be penalized by death. And he did so because God made humans in his image. God, we've all heard this, God made a covenant with Noah, his sons, and with all the animals. A covenant is formal, solemn, and a binding agreement with God. God promises never to flood the earth and destroy all living things again. God gave the rainbow as a reminder of his covenant. Now, Genesis 9, let's take a look at our timeline here for a second. Genesis 9 brings us here to the end of judgment. Okay? And we're going to see more sin encroach onto Noah's life. When we started in 6, things were pretty pure. Noah was considered worthy, right? But here in 9, we're going to see an unpure aspect of Noah's family. Now, it's and because Noah's going to get drunk, and so clearly he is not the same person that he was when this started. And his family is going to see the consequences of that. So let's get back into it. So Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Noah becomes drunk on the wine from his vineyard. So there's Noah's sin. It's not sinful to drink wine, but it is sinful to drink wine to the point where you're inebriated. He laid naked in his tent. Ham saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers. Sounds innocent enough. Shem and Japheth took a garment and covered their father without looking at him. So Ham reports it. Shem and Japheth do something about it, appearing to be trying to be respectful to their father. But when Noah awoke and realized that what Ham had done, so there's a direct implication here that Ham did something wrong. So this goes beyond Ham just reporting his father being naked to his 2 brothers. He cursed Ham's son, Canaan, and declared that Ham's offspring would be servants to his brother's offspring. So what did Ham do? Well, there's some different theories there. He could have been guilty of voyeurism. Maybe he did. I don't know. I don't know what, but maybe he looked at things he shouldn't have, and for some reason Noah knew what he had done. Was there a usurp of authority? Was this about Noah being incensed by the idea that Ham had told his brothers? Maybe it would have been preferable for Noah, or for Ham, to simply just not say anything so that it didn't become a public spectacle. That's a possibility. Could there have been homosexual incest? That's a possibility as well, I suppose. Could there have been maternal incest? Could Ham have had sex with Noah's wife or his mother? That's a possibility as well. Now, considering the severity of the punishment, and you might note that it was more painful to Ham to punish his son than it was to punish himself, right? So he was going to have to watch his son with this curse that had been bestowed upon him, right? So again, back to the statement, when Noah woke and realized that Ham had done, he cursed Ham's son, Canaan, and declared that Ham's offspring would be servants to his brother's offspring. So Ham's son was going to be a servant to his brothers. And this would have been very difficult for Ham to watch. So this was a pretty severe punishment. So when we look at these list of four, one of the last two, the homosexual incest or maternal incest, seem to stand out. Noah blessed Japheth and Shem for the kindness and dignity they showed him. So apparently what they did was right. And Noah lived for 350 years after the flood, died at the age of 950. So Noah lived a nice long life. All right, so here we are, Genesis 10. Let's see where that brings us in our, let's see where that brings us in our timeline. So Genesis 10, so now we see nations, races, and pagan religions. So man is beginning, sin is beginning to take hold again. All right. Industry is building, nations are building, identities are building. All right, so Genesis 10 is a record of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their families. They're all significant men, because remember that there was very few people on the earth after the flood. And so these families, these three families, built the world, right, from this point forward. So they're patriarchs of nations of the ancient world, founders of historical significant cities. Jephthah's sons, he had 7 sons, and Jephthah's family developed differing dialects, and many made their homes in the coastlands. Ham's sons, he had 4 sons. Most notable here was Nimrod, the first mighty man on the earth. And the Philistines were descendants of Ham's son Egypt. Canaan was the father of Sidon and Heth, and the nations of the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, and Hivites. Shem had 5 sons: Elam, Asur, Arpachshad, might have said that wrong, Lud, and Aram. Abraham was a descendant of Shem. Okay, and then the next, as we move into the next chapters, beyond chapter 11, we start looking at Abraham and his journeys in Genesis. And then finally in Genesis 11, we see the Tower of Babel. So essentially the whole world was speaking the same language. And many people lived in the land of Shinar. The people decided to build a tower that reached to heaven. They were aspiring to be like God, right? So sin was once again becoming great. And God inspected their work and then separated them. So they spread across the world rather than reside at one place. Now, how did they do that? Well, in the next quote, come, let us go down. And oh, by the way, there's us again. Who's us? Could that be the Trinity? I think so. Let us go down and there confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. The confusion resulted in abandonment of the tower as they dispersed over the face of all the earth. So, God assigned different languages. And to this day, we live on a world with many, many different languages. This is where it started, right? So you've got this team building this tower, and the work is progressing. You've got people communicating. You've got the laborers. You've got the architects. You've got the engineers, and they're all working together and communicating well, and they're able to build this tower. Now, it's important to point here is that tower was not threatening to God. The point was that they were trying to be God or be like God, and they had the belief that somehow they'd have the ability to do that. God needed to put an end to that. So again, he delayed the perseverance of sin, the expansion of sin, by assigning language to these different people, and that forced them to formulate into tribes and scatter across the earth. Therefore, its name was called Babel, which means confused, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. In the last part of Genesis, we get into the genealogy of Shem. And most notably here, I want you to notice now we're really seeing the ages fall apart. We start with Shem living to 600. We end with Terah dying at 148. 643, 433, 464, 239, 239, 230, 148. Notice how people continue to die younger as sin permeates the world. Now, we've seen a reversal in our time of that because of our advances in healthcare. Previously, 50 years ago, when healthcare was not as advanced as it is today, 50, 100 years ago, we were seeing people dying at 50, 60 years old, right? So it's interesting to me how sin permeates every bit of our being. And this is why Jesus Christ was needed, because it's impossible to escape. Every one of us have sinned today, and will sin tomorrow. We'll have ill thoughts towards other people. We'll see things that we shouldn't have seen. We will conceive and desire things that we shouldn't be thinking about. We will hurt other people intentionally or unintentionally. There will be a sin pervades, and then disease. The disease is a consequence of the fall, and I'll just add that ultimately this is why bad things happen to good people, because of the fall and the free will that it was given to people, to Adam and Eve, when they were given the choice to eat from the tree of, or where they were given the option. They were told not to, but they had the option to physically eat that fruit, and they did. And so this is why in current day, bad things continue to happen to good people. The family of Terah, at 70 years old, fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran's son was named Lot. We're going to hear a lot more about Lot going forward. Abraham married Sarai, and Nahor married Milcah. Sarai was barren, but would someday be the mother of Israel with God's help. We're going to hear about that as we go into Genesis. Terah and his son Abram moved from Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran and settled there. Terah died at the age of 205 years. Notice she didn't go to 900. All right, and with that, that concludes my presentation on the chapters 1 through 12 of Genesis.